friendly reminder to please maintain your mask over your mouth and nose for the duration of the service. Also, please silence your cell phones and turn off your Wi-Fi connections. Thank you. Welcome to the worship service of the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Lakeland. I am Heather Norby, the spiritual life director for this fantastic congregation, and I use the pronouns she and hers. We are glad you are here, whether in person or virtually. UUCL is a thriving community, and whatever your gender identity, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, abilities, or theological beliefs, you are welcome here. We would love to get to know you better, so please join us after the service on the patio, or if on Zoom, please say hello through the chat feature. We publish a newsletter every Wednesday, and it is the main source of information for what goes on around here, so be sure to sign up. If you've already received it, be sure to read it to find out about all the great things that go on around here. Of special note today is a special worship and programming event that we've scheduled for next Sunday. We will show a documentary called The Doctrine of Discovery, starting at 9:30. And then we'll take a little break after that's over. It's about an hour. And we'll start worship at 11, and we'll worship from about 11 to 11:30, ending early, so that we can have a conversation about the documentary. And that we'll probably wrap up around noon, so that way we can have snacks on the patio and then come back in for the social justice meeting. So we hope you are intrigued by this spiritual learning and worship opportunity and would love to see as many folks involved in this as possible. Also, I would like to note that our auction, our annual service auction, is on Sunday, December 12th. So that means that we are looking for donations. Donations of items, maybe an unwanted item from your home that someone else might like, or an experience that you'd like to share with your church family. For example, a bird watching walk. That's what I do with Dorothy and Ken each year. You can offer to drive people to the airport, to pet sit. You can offer, like Justin and the tech team, a tour of the tech room. So there are some items already up, but we need more items. And then, of course, we want for everybody to participate in the purchasing of the items. This is a big fundraiser for us, and I know we've already actually sold a whole bunch of stuff on our Facebook Marketplace page. Thank you to Ken and Dorothy who got that going. That means we have a clean closet over here. So in that vein, I would like to give a great big thank you to the fundraising committee. We got the fundraising committee up and running this year, and that way we can make sure that we're financially stable as a congregation. Members of the committee include Justin Neal, Brandon Knuckles, Ken Schmidt, Dorothy Lemmy, Rachel Walter, myself, and Gail Rushford. This committee is developing plans for the annual service auction and other possible projects such as a murder mystery dinner, online fundraising, raffles, a cornhole competition, stickers, t-shirts, maybe a dance. If you have an idea, go ahead and throw it to the committee. Thank you. Thank you to all of you that work so hard to make sure that we can remain a vital and thriving community. Let us begin. My opening words today are from the Reverend Karen Johnston. Let us be a people of not forgetting. As we gather this morning, let us be a people of not forgetting. Let us practice holding collective memories that might otherwise slip into that enormous void that sucks at and corrodes any future we hold dear. Let us practice honoring truth-telling, up from the past that must come fully into the now, lest we falter and fail, lest the whole remain in pieces. Let not our need for comfort or simplicity, for easy forgiveness or false pardon, smother the heartbreak that still needs healing. Let us practice resilience with reckoning. Let us marry memory and promise. Let us dance in the tension we find there. Let us rest in the integrity we cultivate there. Let us be partners with the possibility that emerges there. Just as our congregations across the country and even around the world are lighting their chalices this morning, so will we light ours and create sacred space. Today our chalice lighter is Ken Schmidt. Legacy by the Reverend Paul Sprecher. We light this chalice to honor the memory of those who have come before us, kindling flames of wisdom in dark times, willing to challenge orthodoxy even at great personal risk, giving us a legacy of freedom and a love of truth, a legacy that warms our hearts and lights our paths. Please join me in signing Spirit of Life.
Come unto me, sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion, blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
This is the hour that we gather to contemplate the mysteries of life and to feel the gratitude of being able to approach this holy task together. We gather around the flame of our chalice, a symbol that reminds us of the power that we hold when we connect to one another with love as our guide. Fire is a power that connects us. It is a power that has stayed with humanity throughout time and space. Fire is a gift when we are careful about our tending to it. But it can also be a curse if we let it go beyond its life-sustaining boundaries. Fire is a power that can heal and bring joy harm and destroy. If we don't tend to our own fires, they go out and leave us feeling sorrowful about ourselves, unable to offer any gifts of love to the world. If we let our own fires, those fires in our bellies, get out of control, we may find ourselves seeking power over others, harming and destroying relationships. Thus it has been throughout history. Like fire, if we don't tend to or control ourselves, shaping ourselves around our values, we scorch the fabric of history, leaving the task of healing the burns to future generations. It is those who have carried the torch of love, lit the chalice of truth and justice, that leave us a well-attended legacy of hope, one which we can make our own, so that we too can help shape change for the sustainability and vitality of life. May life be sustained by our fiery passions, not scorched. Our 8th Unitarian Universalist principle seeks to fulfill the promise to accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. Our spiritual explorations for November here at UUCL are leading us on a journey of questioning our histories and our memories. How do we hold history, open our hearts to it, grieve it, honor it, put out the fires of racism that are still burning the fabric of our lives? Today, the UUCL Book Group will raise our awareness of the ways in which the harmful fire of racism is embedded in our institutions, so that we know we need to address it and not ignore it. And today you are invited to hold history with an open, vulnerable heart that seeks to be accountable and to heal. Let us turn now to honor the weaving of joys and sorrows that run throughout our lives, throughout all lives, throughout history. We will invite you up to the chalice table to place stones into our basket of sand. If you are on Zoom, we will say your name and put a stone in for you so that we know that you are here with us, and so you know that we are together. If you do not want your name said, please say so in the chat. Before I begin, I would just like to say thank you to the family of Ted Delaney for leaving us these beautiful flowers today. those on Zoom, Mark Gatsky, Sarah Drum, Jane Eskenazi, Nancy Morse, and two new guests, Jason and Charles. Thank you for joining us today. This is a reading. It's an article from the Washington Post, June 3rd, 2021, written by Michelle L. Norris. Shortly after the National Museum of African American History and Culture opened up in 2016 on the National Mall, I was speaking to some patrons of a successful nonprofit about the importance of candid racial dialogue in politics and in the places we live, work, and worship. One of the participants had recently toured the museum and had a pointed question. Why, she wondered, were all the exhibits that visitors first encounter dedicated to slavery? Among other things, she was referring to a reconstructed cabin built by former slaves from Maryland, and a statue of Thomas Jefferson next to a wall with the names of more than 600 people that he owned. Couldn't the exhibits begin with more uplift, the woman asked? She suggested that the museum should instead usher visitors toward more positive stories right from the start, so that if someone were tired or short on time, slavery could be optional. Her question was irksome, but it did not surprise me. I'd heard versions of the "can't we skip past slavery" question countless times before. Each time serves as another reminder that America has never had a comprehensive and widely embraced national examination of slavery and its lasting impact. Yes, there are localized efforts, but despite the centrality of slavery in our history, it is not central to the American narrative in our monuments, history books, anthems, and folklore. There is a simple reason. The United States does not yet have the stomach to look over its shoulder and stare directly at the evil on which this great country stands. That is why slavery is not well taught in our schools. That is why the battle flag of the army that tried to divide and conquer our country is still manufactured, sold, and displayed with defiant pride. That is why any mention of slavery is rendered as the shameful act of a smattering of Southern plantation owners, and not a sprawling economic and social framework with tentacles that stamped almost every aspect of American life. From the kidnappings in Africa to the horrors of the Middle Passage, the beatings and the instruments of bondage, the separation of families, the culture of rape, the abuse of children, the diabolical rationalizations and crimes against humanity. No, we haven't had that conversation. We have not had that unflinching assessment, and we are long overdue. She continues, America experienced 246 years of slavery before it was officially ended with the passage of the 13th Amendment. That was followed by decades of legal segregation and oppression under Jim Crow, followed by a period of willful blindness and denial. A tourist from a foreign land might well conclude that the Confederacy had actually won the Civil War based on the number of monuments, buildings, and boulevards still named for heroes of its defeated army. The real truth of our shared history was a causality of that war, and like any wound left untended, the results can be catastrophic. A full accounting of slavery is one of terror and trauma. And for decades, the natural inclination was to ask, why would anyone want to claim that history? But at a moment when the United States is dangerously divided, when we are having bitter and overdue conversations about policing inequality in voting rights? When marauders fueled by white nationalist rhetoric can overwhelm the Capitol, proudly waving the Confederate battle flag, the more important question is this: what happens if we don't? Holding history. That is our spiritual theme for worship and programming this month. But what does it mean to hold history? To hold, by definition, means to grasp, carry, support with one's hands. If I imagine holding the history of this country in my hands, then you can imagine with me. I imagine that as I grasp it, I have to pay close attention to it so I can wrap my hands around it just right. As I carry it, I imagine it gets heavy, or the long history of dehumanization starts to burn and I need to put it down. But to hold means to support. And so I imagine being resilient as I hold it. I imagine history, the one we are living right now, needing me to help shape it, changing it, making it lighter by removing the chains of white supremacy, putting out the fires of racism so as not to burn my hands away and render them useless. Our fourth Unitarian Universalist principle states that we covenant to affirm and promote a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. To hold our history means to be responsible as we search for its truth. It means to continue to listen to those who experience the scorching fires of dehumanization, reshaping our understanding of why things are the way they are. It is to understand that these fires were lit by white people, and that white people need to put them out. The author of the book Caste, Isabel Wilkerson, said, "One of the goals of this work is to remind ourselves of what we as a species are losing when we as a species are not making the most of all of the members of our species." Some members of our UUCL Book Group are here today to share their learnings and awakenings to the truth after reading the book Caste. They will share the ways in which they have reacted. They will share their discomfort with the truth and the ways in which they have realized, as our fourth principle promotes, they have a responsibility to the truth.
And I have the privilege of leading our group, our book club, and reading this novel by Isabel Wilkerson opened my eyes to what our country began with. Our history of this country was built on truths, half-truths, myths, stories, and falsehoods. A good look at history takes some searching and researching. For most of us, we grew up feeling we had a pretty good grasp on history. However, Ms. Wilkerson takes a look at the true beginnings. So I will begin at the beginning. Before our country was formed, we will look at the colonists who stole the sacred land of the indigenous people and then enslaved them. With that action, along with the introduction of the captured slaves who were brought to this country, the system of caste thus began. The slaves were thought of as subhuman, and so it was deemed they didn't deserve any better treatment than they were receiving. And they didn't think that they were ever going to be equal to the white population. The power of this book is so strong that we read it weeks ago, but we can't seem to drop it. We can't put it down. Ms. Wilkerson defines the difference between caste and class. Class is a term used to see where you are in the makeup of our society. One can move from class to a different class due to education, riches, and outward looks. But the caste is what you're born into, and it's based solely on how you look, what color your skin is, and you can't escape the caste. Now, when President Lincoln issued the Proclamation of Emancipation, he declared that the freed slaves would get 40 acres of land and a mule. However, during Reconstruction, that land was taken back. This action caused a further burden to move out of poverty. And later, with the election of Barack Obama, the caste system was upset. What could we do? How could this happen? This caused the many questions about his legitimacy as to be the leader of our country. This also brought hope for justice for all the people in our country who have been marginalized. It was so painful to read how the black people were treated inhumanely, with lynchings prevalent as late as the 1950s and 60s. This book made me feel so much pain for so many people throughout the centuries. We need to hold history as it occurred, even if it is painful to do so. We can acknowledge the shameful deeds of our ancestors, but now our task is to do all we can to treat all people with dignity and thoughtful words and deeds. Thank you.
My name is Jesse Crossan. I come from a multi-generational family. I grew up in a small white community and went to an all-white school. My family did not use any racial terms while I was growing up. They just did not speak about blacks at all. Neither did any of my extended family. It was just as if they did not exist. When I entered high school, though, I began to hear negative terms used about blacks and brown people and wondered why that was so. My education ignored other races pretty much altogether. During an assembly, we would sing Dixie and thought nothing about it. As I became an adult, I began to discover how lacking my education had been. By the way, I also discovered as a young adult that my maternal grandfather had been a member of the Klan. So when I began reading Caste, it was very difficult to learn about all the horrific things that blacks underwent while in slavery. I also learned that after they were freed, the treatment of blacks was even more horrific. It was so upsetting to me that I was unable to read certain passages in the book. I have now become totally aware of the treatment of blacks and now speak out at every opportunity. Barbara Wallace is a member of our book club, but she is, of course, in Michigan and unable to read for herself. But she has given me some notes to submit to you, and I will give those to you right now. I knew black history in general, and more the seminary than Bobby Harris gave for the League of Women DEI Book Club. But Caste still shocked me. The idea that lynchings could be mass entertainment and that people could even send postcards with pictures of lynched individuals is unbelievably disgusting. My understanding of slavery was black people being forced to work on plantations and live in poverty, not that black people were treated as non-humans. One of the most shocking ideas in the book was that the Nazis had purposely studied Jim Crow laws and policies to learn how to degrade the Jews in their country. They saw that the Americans were very efficient in developing a caste system. The fact that Americans' treatment of blacks as a caste system is crystal clear when Wilkerson points out the characteristics of caste as opposed to class. Being lower class is possible to escape. The only way to escape the caste you are born into is to pretend you are to be something other than you are. Even now in the 21st century, after law has been passed to enforce equality among the races, some Americans cling to the idea that black people are inferior to whites. Ibram Kendi points out that in How to Be an Anti-Racist, that racial equality will never come about, though persuasion and appeal to fairness, and because the real issue is power. Some white people can't get past the idea that power is a zero-sum game. The only way for black people to gain power is for white people to lose it, with the attitude that fearful white people will always cling to power. Our caste system has resulted in depriving Americans of benefits that other countries take for granted, especially health care. All other developed nations have universal health care systems, and because the U.S. does not, the life expectancy is lower than 11 other countries, and infant and maternal mortality. We have made much progress toward legal equality, but so far the dominant caste has managed to sabotage every advance when the law said that schools must be integrated, the movement to fund private and charter schools. After voting rights and legislation passed, the Supreme Court knocked out its teeth. Right now, states are passing laws to restrict voting. Theory was invented. No school in our country teaches CRT. However, it has been banned in several states. The big difference this time, I hope, is that these steps backward are not being slipped past the white people who care about equality. Maybe this time the caste in America will finally lose its grip.
All these great faces. George Santayana, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Ignorance is an artifact of historical silencing, rendering invisible the lives and stories of entire peoples on our planet. George Floyd's murder opened my eyes to the pervasive need of this white country to feel more important than non-white. I wanted to understand what is going on here. Ken and I have participated in exploring the 1619 Project, Caste, and Some of Us. We have learned much more than I ever knew about race atrocities. In high school, I learned that Columbus discovered America, but nothing about what happened after that, such as the violence and the disease, which killed 90% of the indigenous people in that area. Additionally, Columbus was the first to discover the New World, is what I learned. However, he was not. It was the Vikings and Leif Erikson that came 5 centuries earlier than Columbus. A 2020 report brings the number of victims of racial lynching between 1865 and 1950 to almost 6,500 people. These lynchings were so accepted, people gathered for the entertainment of this atrocity, and children watched. What really got me is that the photos taken of these atrocities were sold as postcards. Now, who would want a postcard of somebody hanging from a tree is beyond me. Excuse me. Lynchings had the atmosphere of carnivals, of food vendors, and souvenir stands. The lynching's purpose was to terrorize blacks, and the goal was to maintain a racial hierarchy. I learned from Wilkerson that in 1921, Tulsa, Oklahoma, a white mob massacred the black community that was prospering. Blacks were barred from using white facilities, so they built their own economic system. Using the supposed rape of a white woman in an elevator to attack and burn over 1,200 homes and killed 30 to 300 people. No one was ever prosecuted for these murders. Ms. Wilkerson documents how the Nazis, as was mentioned earlier, how the Nazis studied Jim Crow in America to plan their outcast of the Jews. She describes why the cruel reasoning of caste requires that there be a bottom rung for those in the middle to measure themselves against. She writes about the surprising health cost of caste and depression and life expectancy and the effects of this hierarchy on our culture and politics. The U.S. Census reports that poverty in the general population in the U.S. is 10%, and for African Americans, it's almost 19%. If we want to truly understand why this happened, we must look at history. I learned that blacks were promised 40 acres and a mule during Reformation. Andrew Johnson withdrew that promise. If blacks had received this, we would not see the poverty that we see in their culture today. I also learned World War II veterans were promised the GI Bill for education and home purchasing. However, blacks were redlined for loans and where they could purchase a home. Economists study wealth ownership is an effective way to build wealth. This is just 2 examples that explain this disparity. Build wealth. This is just 2 examples that explain this disparity. Only through the study of history can people really see and grasp the reason behind these changes. And only through history can we understand what elements of an institution or a society continue regardless of continual change. continue, you're not supposed to write like that. Okay. If you go to a doctor for an ailment, they will explore your history to understand causation. Through knowledge of history, citizens can even change their own old belief systems. We learn from past atrocities against groups of people, genocides, wars, and attacks. In school, I learned how Nazis committed genocide with full acceptance from its citizens. I learned of atrocities of the Japanese during World War II. I learned of slavery as it is what it is, rather than the abomination that it is. Through this collective suffering, we have learned to pay attention to the warning signs leading up to these atrocities. Society has been able to take these warning signs and fight against them when they see them in the present day. Knowing what events led up to these various wars helps us better influence our future. Understanding past events and how they impact the world today can bring about empathy and understanding for groups of people whose history may be different from the mainstream. You will also understand the suffering, joy, chaos that were necessary for the present day to happen.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you, and also to Barbara Wallace for sharing that when they first asked me if they could share. I said, yes, November, that will be a good time to share when we are learning how to hold history. And it's hard, right? It feels uncomfortable. I mean, let's just say that, because that's where we're at, and that's where we need to be. As our seventh principle says, we are all interdependent. That means what is happening to others is happening to us, even if we don't realize it, because as white people, we're privileged. But yet, those chains of white supremacy, they're still weighing us down in ways that we don't even realize. And so we have to sit with it. And as our eighth principle says, we are journeying towards spiritual wholeness. We can't get to spiritual wholeness if everybody can't get there. Thank you for listening to our book group today. And I began our message today with a reading from Michelle Norris, who asked, what happens if we don't claim our history? Well, we lack in empathy, for one thing, as Dorothy said. But I'd like to conclude with a part of her article that points to a way forward. For you are probably wondering, what is the good news today, Heather? What can Unitarian Universalists do? Where's the hope? How can I be a blessing? So listen to what else she wrote. The United States is not the only country with an evil antecedent that was swept aside, forgotten, or minimally examined. That list is long, but one country offers a powerful alternative path. Barely 3 generations ago, Germany hosted horrors that killed millions and left the nation split in 2. And yet today, less than 100 years after the rise of Adolf Hitler, Germany has made a prodigious effort to come to terms with its past, with regularized rituals of repentance and understanding. This collective culture of atonement is captured in the 8 syllables and 26 letters that comprise the German word, all right, hold on, Vergangenheitsverarbeitung. It's a mouthful that translates loosely to working off the past. Imagine traveling through an American state and coming upon a small embedded memorials that listed key facts about the lives of the enslaved. Their names, their fates, their birthdays, their number of times they were sold, the ways they were separated from their families, the conditions of their toil. Imagine how that might shape the way we comprehend the peculiar institution of slavery, its legacy, and its normalized trauma. Imagine if there were similar embedded memorials for indigenous peoples who were forced from their land, relegated to reservations far from their normal ranges and regions. Imagine stopping to fill up the tank at a roadside gas station and noticing the reflection off a gleaming brass marker that bears the names of the tribal elders who once lived where you are standing. We know the countries that combine truth and resolve have the best chance to reconcile with a difficult past. That is the hope. Truth is the most important ingredient. It is long past time to face where truth can take us. So I ask you, dear congregation, can you imagine how we can bring truth to this place, this land we sit on right here, right now? Let that be something to think about as we take a moment to share the abundance that we have. When we share with this congregation, we are able to continue the ways in which we learn together. And when we learn, we know how to live into our values that light the healing and life-sustaining fires. Our ushers will now pass the plates as we receive the blessings of our choir and music director in this next hymn, We Shall Overcome.
We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand someday.
me now in this responsive reading. Your part will appear on the screen behind me. We are connected to the whole history of the universe, from its beginnings in the fires of the stars to the fires of our first human ancestors.
We tend the fires of our histories, so that all may find peace.
We are contributing beings of one interconnected process.
We tend the fires of our histories, so that all may find peace.
We each have a fire within us, lit by history, by our ancestors, and the events of their lives.
We tend the fires of our histories, so that all may find peace.
If we forget to hold history with an open heart, our fires might rage and harm others.
We tend the fires of our histories, so that all may find peace.
If we tend to our fires by loving and knowing ourselves, we can keep our passion for love and justice alive in the world.
We tend the fires of our histories, so that all may find peace.
Let us create novelty in the universal story that draws upon our deepest values and helps us to keep the fires burning in all for peace, equality, justice, and spiritual wholeness.
We tend the fires of our histories, so that all may find peace.
By our covenants with one another, may it be so.
Closing words. Our fourth principle states that we covenant to affirm and promote the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. The good news of Unitarian Universalism is that the fires of truth and meaning burn inside of us, and there we are responsible for tending to them. We are the shapers of change, and we can atone for the past and leave this world a better place than we found. That is how our love continues to light the path forward. Okay, we'll extinguish the fire. Please join me as we extinguish the chalice. We extinguish this chalice, but not the light of the fruit